right, good morning to you. Welcome to the adult Bible class. We'll be talking about St. Patrick today. Well, that's about the best I can do of my Gaelic. At least it's better than what, hon? Huh? Nothing? Better than my French. That's true. So this Friday is March 17th, and that is typically celebrated as the anniversary of the death of St. Patrick in 461 AD as a secular and religious holiday. And so we'll take a quick time out from where our regularly scheduled programming of church history and take a look, like we did over Christmas, at how this has become such a phenomena. And if I had done my research before I made my slide, I would have put up an orange clover, because I'm wearing my St. Patrick's Day attire today. And that might make more sense why I'm wearing orange instead of green by the end of this lesson. So, missionary in Ireland to global influencer, and I took a quote out of Matthew's gospel: "Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, then it gives light to all in the house." And so much like the Christmas holiday that we celebrate, which is really the 1920s era resurgence out of the Dutch in New York, it is a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to speak into the lives of people that don't actually know anything about Christianity, but they do, in fact, take time out to celebrate or to party, anyhow, on St. Patrick's Day. So if you are going to come back for regular adult Bible class next week, we're in the middle of the medieval Roman Empire and how that influence leads into scholasticism in the church. Some reading resources for you if you wanted to further read about some things. I posted these in the description on the YouTube, and after the service sometime I'll get them posted as well, so that the links are available on the Facebook side as well. But Marian, Broderick, St. Patrick, Life Legend and Legacy from the Dublin Press, or in Dublin, the O'Brien Press. Roy Fletcher, St. Patrick Retold, The Legend and History of Ireland's Patron Saint. Padraig McCarthy, My Name is Patrick, St. Patrick's Confessio. That was supposed to be in italics, so don't penalize me points for not having the formatting right. Yeah. And Julie Murray, St. Patrick's Day, which is a kid's book, actually, which is pretty neat if you happen to be involved with teaching up kids. The Biography Channel has a full biography of him, documentary. Tristan Hughes, the St. Patrick in the Ancients. It's a podcast. This is a completely secular perspective on the life of St. Patrick. It is a professor at USC who gets interviewed by Tristan Hughes on this episode to talk about St. Patrick. The history guy, he's a pretty interesting dude. He's, like Bill Nye, the science guy, is to science. The history guy is to history. Except this guy actually has a degree in history, so he's qualified to talk about the subject, unlike Bill Nye, who is not. But he's entertaining. So the history guy has a Who is the Real St. Patrick, and then Vision Video has a cartoon kids movie where they incorporate some of the actual elements of St. Patrick's life along with some of the more famous kind of myths and put together a cartoon, which is a really neat way to kind of present St. Patrick. So today I hope to talk about or just kind of share the significance of St. Patrick's Day around the world, give a brief biography of the man from the sources that we can actually count on historically, and then take a look at some of the mythical tales and how those came to be, and then try to explain how this has become such a global phenomena. So let's pray this morning, and we will get into the lesson. Father, I thank you for having called people like Patrick and preserving some of their history, some of the heroes of the faith, Lord, and just ask that as we consider all that he did and the heart he had, that we wouldn't get swept away in the fairy tales and the myths, Father, but that we would see a true man of God who desired to make you famous, to convert pagans to Christianity in his lifetime, Father. And I just ask that this study today would give us each a opportunity, a way of connecting with people that do celebrate it as just this pagan festival or this time of partying, Lord, that we could also, like Patrick, turn them back toward your word, your gospel, and your Son. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. I've just pulled out a couple of pictures that kind of encapsulate or project the importance of this holiday and how it is perceived here in the United States. In 2022, this is a regular occurrence in the city of Chicago, where they will actually dye the Chicago River completely green on St. Patrick's Day. You can see on the left that John F. Kennedy actually was on a parade back in 1958. And much like 9/11 did to the airline industry, you don't see presidents riding in open cars like this anymore because of this man, right? So the world has changed, but some of these traditions go on. If you look at the picture on the left, that was me visiting Rio de Janeiro. I don't know if you can see the shadow. I guess when a Protestant shows up to a Catholic memorial, God just obscures it. He's like, no. But you can see they illuminate that. That's actually part of a global campaign that was launched in 2010 called Greening the World by the tourism industry in Ireland. And we're going to see some other photos of it. But you can see St. Patrick's Day is celebrated in Brazil. March 17th, you might say, is sort of a big deal. You've got the Sydney Opera House, the Coliseum. The hotel that you see right there with the big shamrock projected on it is the Burj Khalifa. It's the only 7-star hotel in the world. It's like $15,000 a night to stay in the hotel. You've got the Space Needle in Seattle, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, the Great Pyramids in Egypt, the Great Wall of China, even Disney. Instead of having a green mouse, they illuminate the whatever the castle thing is there in green, in honor or remembrance of St. Patrick's Day. So I guess you could say it has become sort of a big deal around the world that on March 17th, everything goes green. Well, who was this guy? Well, according to his confession, so he wrote what's called a confession. It's not too terribly long, actually. It's about a 15-minute read. And it was written by him when he was brought up on charges near the end of his life for some mysterious sin that he had committed when he was probably 15 years old. And he doesn't specify what that sin was, but he talks about it, and apparently he confessed it to somebody, how he still felt guilt over it, and they turned around and used it against him, and he was at that time also a bishop, and they used that to remove him from serving in the church. And so he begins his confession with this statement that he was born in Britain in Bonaventura, or whatever that is. And where is that? Nobody really knows for sure. And this is part of the mystery that has made St. Patrick so popular, because when you don't know for sure where it is, if you're trying to promote tourism in your area, you say, well, my area historically used to be this place where St. Patrick was born. You see, come visit St. Patrick's birthplace. And nobody can deny it because you can't point to the actual place that it was. And so there's a dozen different cities in Britain that claim to be the birthplace of St. Patrick, that try to connect their historical place to this Bonaventura place. So There's a stained glass picture of St. Patrick there on the left with the quote, "Do you know the way to Tabernae?" No, I don't, nor does anybody else. But what's important about that is that the time period around 385 AD, Britain was a Roman territory. And the church, the Bishop of Rome had sent a bishop up to Canterbury, name of Alexander, to establish the church in Britain. So we have a presence of the Catholic. I don't mean Roman Catholic, okay? The Roman Catholic Church of today really didn't start till Vatican II, but before that, it started in the 1520s at the Council of Trent. Okay, the Catholic Church was never Roman Catholic, but it was progressing in that way throughout history. So at this time, the church was a unified church between the East and the West. The Bishop of Rome had sent a bishop to I just said the name of it. Rewind the tape. What was the city? What did I just say? Alexander went to, was it Canterbury? Okay. All right. It's where the current Anglican Church counts their head of the church at, Westminster. Yeah, Westminster. And so there was both a Roman political power that was present in Britain, as well as a religious presence of Christianity. And Patrick's grandfather, Potitus, was actually a priest. And his father, Calpurnius, was a deacon. Now, at this time, deacons were seen as kind of a stepping stone into the priesthood. And as we get more into feudal, medieval Roman Western Empire, this becomes important because it's the only avenue for social progression outside of already being a noble. So if you're born in kind of this commoner state, the only way to kind of elevate yourself is to go through to have your sons go through the church. But in 406 AD, the Western Roman Empire experienced a significant change. The Rhine River, is everybody familiar with some of the geography of Europe to know where the Rhine River is? It basically marks the boundary between current-day France and current-day Germany, and it runs almost the full length north to south. And it's a very wide river. At points, it's over a mile wide. And it is a tremendous natural border that prevents people on the east of it from crossing into the west where the Roman Empire was. Well, in 406 AD, they had consecutive years of significant cold. And by the time of the winter of 406, that river froze over. So the Western Roman Empire, who had typically only needed to defend the bridges that crossed the river, now had to try and defend the whole length of the river for miles and miles and miles against Visigoths and Berbers and Burgundians and all these barbarians who were trying to move west but couldn't because they couldn't get through the Roman defenses of the bridges. But now the river's frozen over. So in 406 AD, tens of thousands of Goths cross into the Roman Empire. Now, they didn't cross as invaders. They crossed because they were being pressured by Huns, who were also experiencing this cold, and they were being driven out of their high plains land in Turkey and China and Mongolia. And so the Huns were pushing on the Goths were pushing into Rome, and they were trying to get into Rome, not to overtake Rome, but to be partakers of the Roman wealth and opulence. They wanted to be like the 49ers were to California, right? They wanted to participate in the gold rush and the fervor. They wanted to not overrun California, these guys not overrun Rome, but partake in it. In fact, one famous Goth by the name of Alaric, who actually sacked Rome in 410, did so because he was trying to get land for his people, and he was appointed to this generalship, and the Romans Valerius, the emperor in Rome, actually withdrew his generalship. And he's like, well, if you're going to play stupid games, you're going to win stupid prizes. And so he took his Gothic army, his Visigothic army, and he went and sacked Rome in 410, the city. So this is important, because what do you do if you are the Roman Empire and you've got legions stationed in Britain where nothing's happening, and you've got Goths invading down in the mainland? Well, you do the only sensible thing. You pull your troops out of Britain and you put them in the mainland to fortify your defenses, right? Well, what does that do but weakens Britain? And so now the Gaelic from Ireland can come over, the Vikings from the Netherlands can come over. And that's exactly what happened. And Patrick was brought to Ireland as a slave because of this reduced British defensive posture that existed. So in a way, the cold winters that caused the Goths to be able to cross into Rome allowed the Gaelic to go and take Patrick as a slave to Ireland. In his Confessio, after I arrived in Ireland, I tended sheep every day, and I prayed frequently during the day. More and more the love of God increased, and my sense of awe before God. Faith grew, and my spirit was moved, so that in one day I would pray up to 100 times, and at night perhaps the same. I even remained in the woods and on the mountain, and I would rise to pray before dawn in snow and ice and rain. I never felt the worse for it, and I never felt lazy. As I realize now, the Spirit was burning in me at that time. Patrick credits his captivity as a slave and his being forced into being a shepherd up on the pasture lands and exposed to the hardship of the winter as the thing that converted him and made him experience the love of God. It's interesting that we try to coddle people oftentimes and tell them that, becoming to faith is this thing that's going to make you happy and give you wealth and fame and solve all your problems, when in fact for Patrick it was the hardship of slavery and the hardship that he realized he needed to count on God because he couldn't count on his own human strength. Now, remember I said his grandfather was a priest and his father was a deacon in the church. So you would think as a, pastor's kid, he would just instantly be a part of the faith. But he knew it wasn't true until this time that he was in Ireland. Well, he has this dream, he explains in his confession, that there's a ship waiting for you. There's a ship waiting for you. And so he writes that he escaped because of this dream, the voice saying, "You have fasted well. Very soon you will return to your native country." Again, after a short while, I heard someone saying to me, "Look, your ship is ready." So this journey from where he was pasturing in Northern Ireland to the sea was a 200-mile journey. And he had to cross it on foot at night, hiding during the day. It was a difficult, a strenuous journey for him. And when he gets to the sea of, I guess, Ireland or Britain, what is the sea in between the two of those? I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called the Sea of Ireland, but I could be wrong. The people waiting for him were pagans. And he actually writes that they wanted him to basically take an oath of loyalty to them by sucking on their nipples. I'm not making it up. That's just what it says. That was apparently their test, and he refused. He says, "I'm not going to, commit." And so he kind of left disappointed and began praying, and they saw the fervor of his prayers and decided, "All right, I guess you can come with us." So they sail across to Britain, and they begin wandering the British countryside, trying to get back to where this pagan tribe was. And they didn't have food, they didn't have water, and they're almost dead. And the leader of the tribe, basically, or of the sailors, say, "If your God is really so strong, he can provide us food." And so lo and behold, Patrick's prayers were answered. Again, this is Patrick writing in his confession, that they came across 2 wild pigs and some wild honey. But the pagan sailors offered the wild honey to their gods as thanksgiving, their idol gods, and so he refused to partake of any of the honey. And then he says he was set upon that night by Satan himself in the guise of one of the sailors, and that he felt as though a boulder had been dropped on him, and he was fighting with this demonic power through the night until the sun went up, and he called on the sun, the Helios, to save him. And he at that time he was thinking Helios as God, not like the sun god, but as the S-O-N. Well, after a few years with these British pagan tribes, he gets reunited with his family, who were not brought to Ireland as slaves, and then he decides he's going to become a priest. At 46 years old is the legend, but we know he was middle-aged. He decides he has a call to go back to Ireland and preach the gospel to the people that enslaved him. He recognized that God brought him through that he used that experience to save his soul. And so he wanted to go back into Ireland and begin preaching the gospel. And he is very effective. And one of the things that made him effective is he used some of the secular ways. Like he would go directly to the chief of the tribes, because he knew if he could convert the chief of the tribes, that the people who were in that tribe would be more willing to listen to him. And he knew he couldn't get an audience with the chief of the tribes unless he brought gifts of gold or whatever else. So later in his life, this was used against him, saying he was bribing people or purchasing their conversions, and that then he would get the wealthy women, especially who were widows in the tribes, to pay him so that he would baptize them, and then he would have the finances to go to the next tribe and be able to get an audience with the chief of that tribe. They also accused him of other pagan practices, such as educating children. Apparently the Christians at that time were not educating their children. I couldn't find any historical evidence of that, but that's written in his confession of basically selling church offices for money, which is simony, and other crimes. And allegedly he died on the 17th of March in 461. In his Confessio, he writes near the end of his life, "But what can I say, or what can I promise to my Lord? There is nothing I have that is not his gift to me. But he knows the depths of my heart, my very gut feelings. He knows that is enough that I desire very much, and am ready for this, that he would grant me to drink of his chalice, just as he was pleased to do so for others who loved him." He recognizes his death is imminent. "For this reason, may God not let it come about that I would suffer the loss of his people, who have become his in the furthermost parts of the earth. I pray that God give me perseverance, and that he grant me to bear faithful witness to him, right up to my passing from this life, for the sake of my God." So even, being charged by his own Christian religious leaders, his desire was to face his death in a manner that was honoring to God, so that his testimony to the people who converted would not be lost, that they would persevere in their faith as well. So the photos that I have put on the back are different artistic recreations of his death. So that's all we really know that we can kind of say is factual about his life, because every other source that we have comes several hundred years after he died, and they all come from a source that is motivated financially and politically to make him out to be more than he really was. So there's one book that has three sources that was written by a monk named Ferdinand of Armagh, trying to promote this church of Armagh as the preeminent or most important church. Imagine, St. Peter's in Rome saying, well, we're important because this is where Peter set up the church in Rome, and this is where Peter died, and this church is built over the bones of Peter. And for, $29.95, you can go look at the bones of Peter at the bottom of St. Peter's Basilica. And for $5 more, you can write your name in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's there, and for $5 more, you can kiss the foot of the statue, and, on and on it goes. This kind of commercializing and promoting relics was becoming a popular thing in Christianity at this time. Bones of saints, thorns from the crown of thorns, pieces of wood from the cross. They were all considered holy relics. We talked about iconoclasm in the church history, where the Eastern Church began to assert that it was wrong to use relics to worship God because it was idolatry. And the Western Church said, no, we need these relics because these people can't read, they can't write, and the only way they know anything about God is if we have these stained glass windows, these statues, these elements that tell stories. And so the Western Church actually made it illegal religiously to destroy relics. And the Eastern Church was actively destroying relics to try to prevent idolatry. So one of the things that we talked about that raised conflict and eventually split. Well, this book of Armagh, as I mentioned, was several hundred years. This was written in the 700s by this monk. And he records, the late 600s, early 700s, so late 7th century, as a hagiography. Hagios is the Greek word for saint. Graphe is writing, so it's a saint's writing. It is the pitch about why this guy was so important and all the miracles he worked and all the great things, and this is the church he wanted, and so therefore this church is the best. Hoorah. Right? And so the first one is, I don't even know how to say that, Morchu Mocha Machthani, the life of St. Patrick, Latin or something. And again, it was written to raise the esteem of the Church of Armagh. The second one is Tirichan, which is just this collection. The author's name is Tirichan, and the book is The Collectionae. It's just a collection of writings that were intended to disprove claims that other churches were making about St. Patrick to try to make themselves seem like they were more legitimate. Right? So this is the defense for Armagh. And then this guy wrote the Book of the Angel, which, if you're familiar with Mormonism, allegedly the angel Moroni visited Joseph Smith in the woods in New York and gave him golden tablets and golden glasses and told him to translate and don't let anybody see it, and then bring out these things you've translated. Well, he wasn't the first to come up and invent a story like that, because this late 7th century monk did the same thing and said, oh no, certainly this angel visited Patrick and told him this is the church, that should be the most important church. So I got it written right here in this book, the story of the Book of the Angel. And so you can find these. They're published, and there's many, many mythical tales about things that Patrick allegedly did. And just kind of going in chronological order a little bit and picking and choosing, because there's literally thousands of them. Some of the ones that kind of embellished his story. The first one is when he landed back in Ireland, the first thing he wanted to do was go back and revisit his old slave master, Milic. Milic, hearing that Patrick was coming, did not want to bow his knee to his former slave, so he boarded himself up in his fort and lit it on fire because he'd rather burn himself to death than listen to his former slave. There's another, that after that had happened, a herd of swine led Patrick to their owner, who was then converted by Patrick and gave Patrick a barn on his property that Patrick could then use to preach in. That barn today is a stone church in Saul of County Down. If you ever visit Ireland, you can go visit this stone church that was built on the barn that was given to Patrick to preach in by the man whose herd of pigs led Patrick to him to convert him. It's just a little stretch. Just wee stretch. And then the brother of the guy whose swine led him to him was mistreating his slaves. He had slaves. They were sent into the forest to chop wood with dull axes, and their hands were bleeding. And Patrick saw it, and he stopped and he asked them. They're like, "Oh, this is our punishment." And he goes, "Well, take me to your slave owner." It turned out to be the brother of the guy who owned the slaves. And so Patrick basically sat in this guy's house and went on a hunger strike. And because it was socially taboo to have a guest go hungry in your home, the longer Patrick went on his hunger strike, the worse and worse it looked for this guy. So this guy didn't care that he was abusing his slaves out in the forest, but we can't have Patrick go hungry as a guest in my home, so I better treat my slaves better. It speaks to the compassion that would have been true of Patrick for people of all different levels in society, but doesn't speak well of the landowner, I guess. It's said that after Patrick died, that his body was put on a cart with untamed oxen, and that they were going to carry his body away to where it was buried. They've got a cathedral built in a place called Downpatrick that is allegedly where he is buried. But again, like his birth, nobody really knows where or when he died, so several places get to claim to be the place where he died. It was said that when he was in Ireland, he was given this crozier. A crozier is like a little cross amulet. That little cross amulet was supposedly given to a hermit in the desert by Jesus himself, and somehow made its way to Ireland. And it was that crozier that you'll see when you see like paintings of Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland, or cleansing a well that had poisoned water, and now it's got so it's like Harry Potter's wand or something, it's this magical amulet because it came from Jesus himself through a hermit. When the reformers got to Ireland, they heard and learned about this amulet that had been passed down from the 7th century, and they burned it publicly outside of a church in Dublin. Again, going back to the whole iconoclasm movement, they just said, let's just get rid of it. It is said that he found the earthly entrance to purgatory, and that he spent a day and a night there. The story was anybody who could spend a full day in purgatory while alive would not have to spend any time in purgatory after they had died. At the time of his life, purgatory, all right, anybody know what purgatory is? All right, a couple of the people that have some familiarity with Catholicism. So the Roman Catholic view of salvation is that you are not saved by grace and fully righteous before God because of Jesus's life. You're saved by grace so that you can then live a righteous life and do enough good works that righteousness will be inherent in you when you die. But if you die before you're perfectly righteous, you owe a debt to God that must be paid. But you're not a sinner who's not saved, so you don't go to hell. So there's this middle place, this purging place, this purgatory, where your sins are burned off. They'll point to, this passages in Corinthians where it talks about he will be saved as though one through fire, right? His works were straw, and they'll use that as kind of their proof text for why they believe in purgatory. Proof texting, bad. We'll talk about that during the service too. Purgatory wasn't a belief in the Catholic Church at this time, at the time of Patrick's life. We find no evidence of any writing of any church father at that time that they had any view other than when you died, you were either going to heaven or hell. But by the 7th century, 250 years later, it had become a thing. And so now this embellishing story about Patrick is adding to his life that he found the earthly gate to purgatory and that he spent a day and a night there. And the description of that is actually what Dante used when he wrote his Inferno, which is a very famous work. Dante was actually banned from the city of Venice for hundreds of years. I think it was like 1980 when they finally removed the ban on Inferno from or on Dante from the city of Venice, right? Like hundreds and hundreds of years irrelevant later, they're like, well, all right, it was neat. We'll let him back in, right? Like, but this is said to have been in County Donegal. There's 2 different lakes that have islands on them. Each of the islands claims to be the island that has the gate to purgatory, and you can actually go now and spend time there. I didn't think I wrote down about the fasting and purgatorizing experience that you can do there, but basically involves 9 days worth of fasting, no sleeping. And it might come up, I can't remember. I'll hold it because I think I might have written it down. In the 17th century, pilgrims to Patrick's yeah, it's right there, first line, would fast for 9 days. The first day they would spend, like Aaron Rodgers, shut in a dark hole with no, outside influence, and then they would spend the rest of those days kneeling on small stones. The first time we read about shamrocks was 1527 in association with Patrick. And interestingly enough, during Patrick's day, the shamrock that exists on Ireland today was also not there. So not only did they not believe in purgatory, but they didn't have shamrocks during his day. The thing that they did have was a wood sorrel, basically a mushroom that was edible. But today's plant was introduced there in the 1500s, and it is not edible by humans, right? I guess it's wonderful for bees to make honey out of and wonderful for cattle to make steaks out of, but don't eat them raw as people. Not good. He was said to have overthrown many pagan gods. One of the more interesting stories about that is as he's in Ireland, he's got his full bishop's cloak and his staff and his crozier, right? This is the story. His shepherd's crook and his crozier. And one of the pagan gods said that Yahweh, his God, right, is not really God. And he was going to prove it to him by swapping cloaks with him. And they were both going to go into a burning, not building, but like burning man, like a wooden statuary thing in the shape of a man, and they were going to light it on fire and see who was able to come out of the fire alive. And the chieftain said, well, we can't send Patrick in there because what if his God really isn't God? I'll be super unpopular with the people who've all converted to Christianity. Instead, we'll send his page, his attendant in. And so they swapped cloaks. The pagan guy's cloak went on the page of Patrick. Patrick's cloak went on the pagan chief priest guy. And they both went into this wooden man structure and they lit it on fire. And evidently, the cloak of Patrick was unharmed, but the pagan priest inside was burned up. And the pagan priest's cloak was burned up, but the page of Patrick was fine. And so Patrick's page picked up his cloak and walked out of the burning fire just fine. And that's how they knew the pagan god was wrong. There was another story about one of the pagan chiefs who, after Patrick defeating the pagan god, decided he was going to assassinate Patrick. But Patrick's charioteer had learned about the ruse and said, I'm always the one, down in the driver's seat, and you're always up there. What about just one day I get to ride in the back and you ride in the front? And he did that because he knew that day was the day the guy was going to. So the guy pops out of the woods, boop, boop, stabs the charioteer thinking it's Patrick. And Patrick is unharmed. And so this guy was martyred on Patrick's behalf. So you get a feel for some of the mythical tales of Patrick and how they're kind of propping up the story of Patrick and using the Christian God in much the same way the Jews in the Old Testament were using the Ark of the Covenant, right? They brought it out with them to battle as if it was a talisman or a magical, spell casting protection device. Instead of worshiping God with it, they were using it to do their own bidding. And so these tales of Patrick were told kind of to do the bidding of these churches and these places that were trying to establish themselves as authentic or important or significant. And so how did we get to where we are today in the U.S. To begin with St. Patrick? Well, the story begins with 40 million Irish people migrating to the United States and bringing with them their favorite saint, Patrick. Originally, in Ireland, St. Patrick's Day was a day for fasting. It was a required day of church attendance for people. They would get up in their best clothes and they would go. Well, sometime around 1737, some wealthy Irish Americans in Boston began to hold extravagant lunches for themselves in the taverns in Boston. This is the start of the whole, party atmosphere of St. Patrick's Day. By 1762, the opulence, the feasting in the taverns in Boston had spread to New York to such an extent that they were actually holding parades and marches in Boston. And this tradition of, quote, drowning the shamrock, which apparently has to do with drinking, was this remembrance of one of the other myths that Patrick had actually brought the whiskey distillery to Ireland. Green for St. Patrick's Day is the color that is associated with the Catholics, whereas orange has always been the color that was associated with the Protestants in Ireland, after the Duke of Orange or the whatever of Orange, House of Orange. And so all of y'all who wear green on St. Patrick's Day are actually celebrating the Roman Catholic side of Ireland. If you've ever seen the Irish flag, you'll note that it is a green, white, and orange. Catholic and Protestants separate but in peace, with the white in the middle. That's what that is meant to celebrate. One of the reasons it became a popular holiday, especially in the United States, is by then Lenten observance of Catholics, fasting and denying themselves whatever they give up for Lent. St. Patrick's Day was a day where you were allowed to break that fast and enjoy yourself in remembrance of, Patrick and all the mythical tales that he had of allowable excess. So, of course, that is going to resonate with people who are playing at religion, right? Like, I'm totally giving everything up for Lent, and I need a break from that, not eating meat on Friday by, getting hammered on Friday the 17th or whatever. So I got a couple photos here. That's St. Patrick's Day in Dublin. The kid on the left is actually at they call it the Football Club of Cincinnati, but it's soccer. It's metric football, right? It's not real football. And then the one in the top left is a parade in, I didn't write it down. I think it was in Brazil, but I just put them up there to show you the orange and the green. So I'm wearing my St. Patrick's Day colors because I'm not a Catholic. This is orange, the closest I get to orange. So I don't know if it is or not. Dawn will correct me and tell me it's like some particular shade. Pumpkin? I didn't get the 128 Crayola box as a kid. I got the 8 colors version, so that's all I know. Well, how did it get around the world? Well, some of the ways it got there are pretty interesting, and I picked a few of them out, but not all of them, just to kind of share what happened. And one of them is Australia. You may know that Australia started as a penal colony for Great Britain, right? They sent their prisoners, and many of the prisoners that they sent were Irishmen and Irish women. In 1810, the governor of New South Wales, who was also the prison warden there decided to put on a celebration for the Irish prisoners that were there. A good way to keep peace with the prisoners who were there is to, give them a little party to celebrate their heritage. Today, 35% of all the people living in Australia are of Irish descent. So a little over a third of their country is Irish. It is an official public holiday in 2 of the provinces, Newfoundland and Labrador. So you can see how St. Patrick's Day, with that much Irish influence coming through the penal colonies of Great Britain, made its way into Australia. Well, what about England? Well, first of all, it is said to have been the birthplace of Patrick and his relatives. There's a great story, again, in the Miracles, where Patrick puts his staff in the ground and begins preaching, and he preaches so long that his staff grew roots into the ground. It established. It's also said to be his burial place. Now, I mentioned before there was a cathedral in Ireland. Well, there's also one in Glastonbury, England, because we don't really know where he died. So, with all this mystique and intrigue, you can make different claims and nobody can disprove them. And so you've got your own kind of tourist trap. The first post-Reformation, so you remember, England went through a period, King Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife, who was also his sister-in-law. The Pope said, no, I can't give you a certificate of divorce because his wife's brother was the Holy Roman Emperor and had the Vatican surrounded by Roman troops, right? Don't you dare let my sister divorce that King of England. So the Pope's like, what do I do? If I say yes, I get killed by your brother. If I say no, you're going to, break off between a rock and a hard place. So King Henry VIII basically made his own religion, right? Anglicanism, basically Roman Catholic Light. It's almost all the same things, but then they actually did get reformed. They did get people from Geneva and people from Strasbourg and going into England and actually reforming their theology. So Roman Catholicism was pushed out of England for a long, long time. And the very first post-Reformation Roman Catholic Church to be established again in England was in an Irish slum in the South, in Soho, whatever that stands for. I knew 2 minutes ago, and I can't remember what it stands. South something. Hampton? No. It's a real artsy, expensive place to live now. It used to be basically a ghetto for Irish people. And so the London mayor's like, yeah, fine, you can have your church in this slummy area. And then they turned it around and made it like, super ritzy, artsy. No one can afford to live there. How about France? Well, the rumor is when Patrick went back to Ireland after having been a slave and decided to become a priest, that the bishop that saw him and his request to become a priest sent him to France to get his seminary training. Again, there's no records to disprove that this happened. So several places in France are like, this is where Patrick went to school. So here's our temple. There's this great story of his going fishing in the Loire Valley River. And the locals there said, you can't be fishing here, the Department of Natural Resources version. And so they chased him off. And he went running away to this cave. And he went swimming off, actually, swam across the river, got all wet, finds this cave, takes his cloak off, and lays down to get warm and wakes up, and it's Christmas Day, like Rip Van Winkle. Right? And lo and behold, on Christmas Day in France, this blackthorn bush is blooming underneath his cloak, because he's a blessed holy man. Naturally, the bushes underneath his feet must turn green in the wintertime. Evidently, I'm not qualified to pastor because I don't turn grass green in the winter just by putting my cloak over it. The story goes, the very next year, it bloomed again on Christmas time, proving that Patrick was this holy man and should have been allowed to fish, I guess. How about Nigeria? Like, that's a weird place for St. Patrick's Day to take off. Well, as it turns out, the St. Patrick Missionary Society was involved greatly in assisting the Nigerian people in establishing their independence in 1960. It began as a religious freedom movement led by the St. Patrick's Missionary Society. And so when they established themselves as a free nation, what other saint would be our patron saint besides St. Patrick? The results of which is that Nigeria drinks the most Guinness of all but one nation, that is Ireland, in the whole world. If you don't know, Guinness is the place where the student tea distribution for statistics was made famous. Also, they make beer. So, 20 million Catholics in Nigeria. So that's how Nigeria got to be. So we have Australia, France, England, Ireland, the United States, Nigeria. All these places have influence from St. Patrick. Well, in 2010, the Irish Tourism Board decided to launch this campaign on St. Patrick's Day called the Greening of the World. And their intent was to bring a smile to people's faces and maybe to get you to visit Ireland. And so what they wanted you to do was to splash green light or something on top of your city's well-known building or artifact, whatever it may be. And so people did that. They also coined the phrase, there's a little Irish in all of us, especially on St. Patrick's Day. And because it was this break from Lent, it's a holiday that even the most carnal Catholic, which is the world's largest religion, can enjoy. And so it has kind of got this secular side to it that is resonating with people and is being promoted by Ireland. So that is how we got to where we are, where you pinch people on St. Patrick's Day, even if you know nothing about Christianity. And we who do can tell the story of a real man who went from being a slave, had his heart converted in his hardship, and decided to go back to the people that enslaved him and proclaim the truth of the gospel to them as an opportunity for us, to have our foot in the door, to speak to people. And I would encourage you to wear orange clovers so that you're not identifying yourself with the Catholic Church this Friday the 17th. Questions? All right, well, I can tell it is daylight savings time, so we will see you all at 10:30. Have a blessed morning.